She left for church on a Sunday afternoon. The service was a few miles away. Her parents expected her home for dinner by 6:30. She never made it to the church. She never made it home. And what investigators found near a small creek, just 20 minutes after she left her driveway, would launch one of the most forensically challenging prosecutions in Dallas County history, built almost entirely on a single piece of evidence and a trail of text messages that painted the picture of a man unraveling in real time. This is the case of Zoe Hastings, and the detail that solved it almost wasn't enough. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas. She was the oldest of 5 children, 3 younger sisters and a younger brother, and she took that role seriously. By every account from her family, she was the kind of oldest sibling who showed up when she was needed, who canceled her own plans without complaint to help her parents, who treated looking after her siblings as something she genuinely wanted to do, rather than an obligation. Faith was central to her family's life. Her parents were deeply religious, and the church was not a peripheral part of their week. It was the core of it. When the family relocated to Dallas, Zoe enrolled in a high school with a focus on creativity and the arts. She drew. She performed in theatrical productions. She worked at an art studio. During the summers, she worked as a lifeguard. When she graduated, she had the opportunity to attend some of the most competitive universities in the country. She chose to wait. She wanted to dedicate time to her church first, specifically to prepare for a mission trip she had been anticipating for months. On Sunday, October 11, 2015, she was 18 years old. The mission trip was coming up. That afternoon's service was going to include a planning session for it. She took the family's minivan. She promised to be home for dinner. She left the house at approximately 4:40 in the afternoon. The church was only a few miles away. By 6:30 that evening, Zoe hadn't returned. Her parents sent messages. No response. They called. Nothing. They began reaching out to her friends, to family members, thinking she might have stopped somewhere after the service. Nobody had seen her. They called the church directly. Zoe had never arrived. She hadn't been there at all. Her parents called 911. For reasons that were never adequately explained, officers did not come to the house to take the report. Her parents drove to the police station themselves, filed the missing person report in person, and then went back out to search on their own, retracing the route between their home and the church, back and forth through the night. They found nothing. As morning approached, Zoe's mother remembered something. Her daughter had a location-sharing app on her iPhone. They pulled it up. The phone was stationary, just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek on the other side of the road. They drove there immediately. What they found was a scene already surrounded by police cars, an ambulance, and emergency services. A dog walker had encountered a man near the creek earlier that evening. The man told him there had been a car accident and someone was hurt. They both ran to the scene. The dog walker found a woman lying in a pool of blood and called 911. When Zoe's parents approached an officer and explained they were searching for their daughter, they were told there had been a fatality. It was Zoe. Officers tried to prevent her parents from seeing the scene. The injuries were severe, and what had been done to her was not something any parent should witness. Zoe's body was found several hundred yards from the family's white minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was significant blood near her body. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to the neck area. Her clothing had been disturbed in a way that immediately indicated to investigators that she had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. The crime scene offered several immediate observations. All of the minivan's doors except the driver's were locked, suggesting either that the perpetrator had driven the vehicle or that he had approached Zoe at the scene and the car had been locked in the way it would normally be when a driver is in control. A blood-covered knife was discovered near the embankment under a nearby bridge. That knife would become the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. GPS data from Zoe's smartphone established a precise timeline. She had left her house at approximately 4:40 p.m. The data showed her phone arriving at the creek at 5:01 p.m., just 20 minutes after she left home. And the signal did not move again after that point. 20 minutes. That was all the time between Zoe leaving her driveway and her being at the location where she would be killed. Investigators also learned that she had made one stop on the way. She had gone to a DVD rental kiosk near a local Walgreens to return a movie. That stop, a completely ordinary errand that took only minutes, was where everything changed. Detectives canvassed the area around the store and eventually located two witnesses who had been present in the parking lot at approximately the same time as Zoe. The first was a man named Lester Clark, who worked at a tattoo parlor next to the store. Around 4:45 that afternoon, he had gone to the store to buy cigarettes. He saw a woman near the DVD rental kiosk. Shortly after, he watched her return to the parking lot and approach a white minivan. She reached for the door. A man came up beside her, stopped the door with his hand, and said something to her. After a brief interaction, the woman got into the passenger seat. The man got into the driver's seat. They drove away. Lester said the scene struck him as tense, but nothing visibly violent had occurred, so he hadn't intervened or called police. When detectives showed him a photograph of Zoe, he said the woman matched her description. His description of the man: short, heavy-set, black. He had been too far away to make out any additional features. Later, as it grew dark, he saw what he believed was the same man walking back toward the store alone, on foot. The second witness was a man named Gary Whitman, who was across the street from the parking lot when the incident occurred. He described seeing a woman walking toward the white minivan when a man came up behind her, prevented her from getting into the car, and appeared to show her something from his pocket. The woman then moved to the passenger seat, and the man drove away. Gary's description of the suspect was consistent with Lester's. He said the encounter immediately struck him as wrong. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911. No record of that call was ever found. Before we go further, if you want analysis that follows the evidence all the way through, that doesn't simplify the hard parts or skip the forensic detail, you are in the right place. At Unresolved Years Mysteries, this is the only way we work. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What comes next in this case is where it gets forensically complicated, and that is where it gets most important. Medical examiners examining Zoe's body found trace biological evidence indicating sexual assault. The quantity was too small for a complete DNA profile to be extracted, a significant limitation that would become a point of contention throughout the subsequent legal proceedings. Several hairs were also recovered from her body. These, too, were insufficient for a full DNA extraction. No fingerprints were found on the minivan's doors or steering wheel. Either the perpetrator had wiped the surfaces clean after abandoning the vehicle or had taken precautions from the start. And then investigators examined the knife. The knife recovered near the creek embankment yielded a DNA sample. It was uploaded to the FBI's national database immediately. There was a match. The DNA belonged to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran. Antonio Cochran had an extensive criminal history stretching back to his teenage years. Theft, assault, home invasions. He had been suspected of numerous additional offenses that never resulted in prosecution. The year before Zoe's murder, in 2014, the 17-year-old daughter of his girlfriend had accused him of sexual assault. According to her account, he offered her a ride. Once she was in the car, he drove to a wooded area, told her he would kill her if she tried to escape, and assaulted her there. Antonio claimed the encounter had been consensual. The case went to trial. The prosecution could not produce sufficient evidence to overcome that defense. He was acquitted. He was 34 years old, recently employed at a grocery store, a job he had started just 3 days before Zoe was killed. On the Monday after the murder, he did not show up for his shift. He gave no explanation. When detectives examined Antonio Cochran's phone, they found a sequence of text messages sent in the hours surrounding Zoe's death that presented a disturbing portrait of his state of mind. At 1:48 in the morning, the day before Zoe was killed, he texted a friend he lived with. He was moving out, and he would never see him again. At 2:07 the following afternoon, hours before the murder, he texted his ex-girlfriend to tell her his stepmother had died. He said she had died right in front of him, and he was struggling to cope. Over the next hour, he texted another woman twice. He said he had been drinking through the night, driving around the city and crying. Those were the last messages sent before Zoe's death. That evening, at 9:30 p.m., he texted the friend again. He said he didn't know what to do with his life, that things had taken a serious turn for the worse. The following day, he sent another message to his ex-girlfriend. His life was over, and she would soon understand why. Investigators also examined his browsing history. In the period between the murder and his arrest, he had visited local news websites more than 30 times, specifically checking the crime sections. 5 of those visits were to articles directly covering Zoe's murder. Before the murder, searches related to crime had almost never appeared in his history. The only crime-related page investigators found from before the murder involved gang activity. Cell tower data placed his phone in the area of the store at 4:34 p.m., just minutes before Zoe arrived at the parking lot. His phone had been connected to a different tower throughout the earlier part of the day. The shift in tower coverage was consistent with him traveling toward that specific area shortly before Zoe returned to her car. The investigation had produced a significant body of circumstantial evidence. 2 eyewitnesses placing a man matching Antonio's description in the parking lot with Zoe. Cell tower data consistent with his presence in the area at the relevant time. Text messages establishing a disturbed, intoxicated, and emotionally destabilized state of mind in the hours before the murder. His failure to appear for work the next day. His repeated visits to news coverage of the crime, and his DNA on the knife found at the scene. But the DNA on the knife was the only hard forensic link, and defense attorneys were prepared to argue that touching a knife does not prove you used it to commit a murder. Antonio had previously worked at a movie theater where his job sometimes involved collecting items left behind by patrons. The defense would argue that the knife could have come from that setting, passed through other hands, and ended up at the crime scene independent of Antonio. The partial biological evidence from Zoe's body, the hair and the trace material, could not produce a complete DNA profile. Forensic experts were able to generate an approximate profile, sufficient to exclude obvious non-matches, but not sufficient to conclusively identify a source. When they compared that partial profile against Antonio's DNA, the result was that his involvement could not be excluded. That is a very different statement from a match. It was enough to proceed. Prosecutors made the decision to bring the case to trial. The prosecution's reconstruction of the events was this. Antonio Cochran, emotionally destabilized by grief and intoxicated from drinking through the previous night, drove to the area near the store on the afternoon of October 11th. When Zoe returned to the parking lot after returning her DVD, he approached her. He produced the knife. He compelled her to get into the passenger seat. He drove her to the creek, a low-lying area surrounded by trees, not visible from the road, where he assaulted her, stabbed her 6 times in the neck, and left her. He then attempted to drive the minivan into the water, possibly to destroy remaining evidence inside the vehicle. The car only partially submerged. He wiped the steering wheel and door handles clean, abandoned the vehicle, and walked back toward the store. Consistent with the first witness's account of seeing a man matching his description returning to the parking lot on foot later that evening. The defense challenged the evidentiary foundation at every point. The partial DNA analysis, they argued, proved nothing. It merely failed to exclude their client. The knife DNA, they argued, did not establish the act of murder. The cell tower data placed him within several miles of the store, not at the store. The eyewitness descriptions were made from a distance under declining light. The homeless man, whose testimony had been among the more detailed, was challenged on the grounds that he had an active arrest warrant for a parole violation when he came forward, an attempt to undermine his credibility. The prosecution countered that a man with an outstanding warrant had voluntarily contacted police and accepted arrest in order to give his account. Gary himself said plainly, he knew he would be detained because of the warrant. He came forward anyway because it was the right thing to do. The defense also presented an alibi, that Antonio had been helping a friend at the time of the murder. No corroborating evidence was produced to support this claim. Initially, prosecutors sought the death penalty. As the trial progressed, the evidentiary picture made clear that standard was unlikely to be met. They adjusted their position. After extended deliberation, the jury found Antonio Cochran guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. When the verdict was delivered, Zoe's parents thanked the investigators, the prosecutors, and everyone involved in the proceedings. Her father spoke afterward about something he had carried through the entire ordeal. He said that from the time his children were young, he had warned them about what the world could do. He had worked to protect them. He had done everything a father is supposed to do, and his oldest daughter had been taken from a parking lot a few hundred yards from their home. In 20 minutes, on a Sunday afternoon, on her way to church, he could not have prevented it. That was the truth he had to find a way to live with. The Zoe Hastings case is, in many ways, a study in what investigators can and cannot prove. They had a DNA match on the murder weapon. They had 2 eyewitnesses to an abduction at a parking lot. They had cell data, text messages, browsing history, and a behavioral pattern that told a clear story to anyone willing to read it in full. What they did not have was a complete DNA profile linking the suspect to the victim's body. What they did not have was a fingerprint, a confession, or a witness to the assault itself. The prosecution built the best case the available evidence allowed. The jury believed it was enough. Whether it was enough, by the standards a capital case demands, by the standards justice requires, is a question that defense attorneys raised and that the legal record reflects without fully resolving. What is not in question is who Zoe Hastings was, a young woman who had chosen to delay her own future to serve her faith, who helped raise 4 younger siblings, who drew and performed and worked as a lifeguard in the summers, who left for church on a Sunday afternoon and encountered a man who chose her because she was simply there. Her parents wanted her to know that the people who pursued justice for her did not stop until they had taken it as far as the evidence would go. Thank you for staying with us through this entire case. Zoe Hastings deserves to be known, not just as a victim, but as the person she was. At Unresolved Years Mysteries, that is always where we start. Subscribe if you are not already here. Share this video with someone who follows cases like this one. And leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this investigation stayed with you. We read every one. We will see you in the next video.